in Africa, we see a lot of uprisings, planning for uprisings, in several African countries. The events on the African continent, therefore, as predicted much earlier myself, in 2017, I said, before 2020, 13 African countries would have undergone either soft regime change, soft coups, or violent regime change through uprising, which now seem to be real. The signs that and the symbols that we see are the real symbols and the signs that more is to come against African governments. What do we do then? There is a new method of changing governments strategically placed in the United States of America by George Soros. George Soros funds civil societies, civil disobedience, civil violence in Africa. It is upon you Africans and African heads of state, wherever you were, as you plan to convene next month or before the end of this month in Addis Ababa, to understand the magnitude of this regime change strategy. Many wars are taking place, internal strife, conflicts like the one in Cameroon, Ambazonia, like the one in Biafra, Boko Haram, and then in Biafra, like the one in Libya. But the theme is the same. Regime change, uprising. Is it a matter of taking over our resources? You see, the war in Congo has erupted again. Unknown militias have arrived in Congo, restarted the war, and it is going on. All these culminate to one thing. Are we ready to be independent? As I said last week, this week, are people in Africa ready to accept the results of elections? Elections everywhere in Africa are bringing the chaos we see. The people of Africa seem to be divided after elections or before elections. Is Africa ready for elections? Do we need elections in Africa? If so, are we tolerant enough to accept results? Are we ready? Which method can we use in Africa to make sure that there is hope for the countries and there is hope and the future of Africa is guaranteed? Viewers, the High Court in Malawi today or yesterday was hearing a case when the president had already been sworn in. If the president of Malawi has been sworn in, then the High Court is hearing the case. Is that not a disaster, an accident in waiting? Whether this will make us have a peaceful Africa remains to be seen. And may God help us to build a better Africa. Thank you very much.
very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us today. I can see a lot of you. Are you watching us across the world? I see one of our viewers here, Brian Rotemo. You're watching us all the way from Arlington in Texas. I've seen one of you watching us from, is it Zanzibar and across Mauritania, another one also. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us this morning. This is Good Morning Africa Show. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and of course, the television is Punchline Africa TV, where we get to advance all things Africa, and we have conversations that are for change and to move us forward as a continent. So thank you so much, and I'll first take us through the headlines in what is making headlines in across Kenyan top newspapers, and then we'll go straight to the African news stories, where we have a lot in store for you. We have some news from Zimbabwe, and of course the latest from Algeria. The elections were scheduled to take place in December, but the demonstrations every Friday has persisted. So what is going on there in Algeria? We'll talk about it. And also in Nigeria, of course, the High Court has ordered the release of activist Omoyele Sowore, but the government has not yet done that. So we'll look at that story also. And also Zimbabwe, what's going on in the latest from Zimbabwe, and as well as Ghana. Apparently just yesterday here we talked about how the government has arrested some people who were planning a coup, but the people that were arrested, even the weapons that they had, did not match the statements that the government had given earlier. So that has poured water on the attempted coup claim by the government, and we'll talk about that. And also Egypt, really what is happening there in Egypt. And of course Egyptian president, the current chair of the African Union, gave a speech yesterday in AU and in regards to Libya, because he has to talk about what's happening in the continent and the most pressing issues in the different states that he's now chairing, as the chair of AU. And he talked about Egypt, what is happening in Libya, and he said it is time that some foreign forces stopped the interference in Libya. And I'm sitting there wondering, he is one of those people who is actually contributing to what is happening today in Libya. So we'll talk about that. And also in Guinea, President Alpha Conde, whose term is supposed to be ending next year, seems not to want to leave office, and now he wants to extend the third term. There has been perceptions, according to some statements he's been making lately. And of course, we'll have some news from South Sudan and a host of other countries across Africa. So just keep it here. And of course, some new information from Biafra, what's happening. They're planning to go protest, to hold a protest during the United Nations General Assembly right now in New York. Is it a smart move? Will that resolve anything? Will that help, continue putting the plight of Biafrans out there to the world? Let me know if that is a good move. The Biafrans reportedly are planning to have a protest march there in New York during the United Nations General Assembly. So let me know your thoughts on that. And of course, the latest from Ambazonia, of course, President Paul Biya earlier in the month said he's calling for a national dialogue, and he was not very quite, it was ambiguous. The call was quite ambiguous. He was not he did not lay out the points or the things that he would want to be addressed in this national dialogue. So different parties, different churches, different organizations have been, giving their propositions about what they think should be made part of the agenda. So we have a lot to talk about, but first I'd like for us to just go through the dailies, and then we'll look at the topic of the day, and then of course the news making headlines across Africa in a short while. And on the Daily Nation this morning, on Monday, of course, there's a school in Nairobi that collapsed, and 7 children lost their lives there. And according to the Daily Nation here, on the headlines, it says the killer school owner are still walking free. A day after the tragedy, police are yet to make arrest or hold anyone responsible for the loss of lives and injuries at Nairobi's Precious Talents Academy. Parents who lost their children recorded statements with the police yesterday, and that story is on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation newspaper. I'd just like to know what this says here, because that is quite unfortunate. You would think he would be the first person that the police would go for, but apparently the person still walks around scot-free. And a day after the tragedy that snuffed out the lives of 8 people, another one died in hospital, and injured more than 60 when a classroom structure at Precious Talents Top School in Nairobi collapsed, no arrests have been made. The school's owner, Mr. Moses Wainaina, and his wife, Freshia Wainaina, who serves as the school administrators, were still walking free, and it was not clear what charges would be preferred against them anyway. So Nairobi Regional Police Commander Philip Ndolo declined to comment on the matter, saying instead the action will be taken based on recommendations of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. They did not know what charges to be preferred against these people. What does that even mean? I mean, how about negligence? How about knowing that the school structure was not even suitable for holding, leave alone school, even for anybody to live in such a structure? But they went ahead, and the school had a population of 800 students. You can imagine how many lives were put in danger there. And unfortunately, on the early Monday incident, when the schools had just started, for the week, one of the class, it collapsed. Actually, the whole structure collapsed, and 7 kids died on the spot, and I think another one, the 8th one, died while receiving treatment. And it's quite unfortunate that the owners of the school, who owns the school, who understood that these structures were not even proper, for a school, to hold for kids to go even there to learn, and they've not been arrested, but they're saying, the police is saying now the matter is being handled by the DCI. So let's see what the DCI will come up with. And of course, yesterday, the burial of the Dutch tycoon who was found murdered, and his body stashed in a septic tank in his compound last Friday, was managed to bury it yesterday after a long day of delays, and he was supposed to have been buried on Monday, and then that did not happen, so they buried him yesterday. And according to the Daily Nation, just on the front pages there, under the watchful eye of prison warders, many in plain clothes, Sarah Wairimu, that is now the widow, lay a bunch of flowers on the grave of her late husband, Tom Cohen, whose murder has gripped the nation. "I'm not scared of anybody," she said after she was asked to speak. And one thing Tob taught me is not to take no for an answer. So even in this, I'm going to fight. And even as we stand here, the ones responsible for Tob's death are here in sheep's clothing. Your days are numbered. So that is what Warimo said. So she says the people who allegedly murdered her husband. Of course, she has been accused to have murdered her husband. But now, when she was giving that speech at the cemetery, the Jews cemetery there, she said the people who murdered her husband are there, and apparently she knows them, so maybe she has already forwarded the names to the police. But this is a story that we'll be following very, very keenly. And still on the front pages there of the Daily Nation, a giant NASA now staring at collapse. And ODM is seeking to dissolve the coalition, accusing partners Wiper, NSE, and Ford Kenya of betrayal. But they fired back, claiming Raila party went to bed with Jubilee a long time ago. So yes. And of course, the circus that involves the now long court battle between Linturi and Miriam Kaitani is still happening there. And of course, the mother to Miriam yesterday was in court to say, because Linturi has been refusing that he was ever married to this lady, and that is the Meru senator, for those who don't know what I'm talking about. So it's been a public spectacle, and I refuse to be drawn into it, but it's on the headlines, so somehow we have to talk about it, right? And so the mother to the lady was in court yesterday and said, you know what, even this guy gave me a car when he visited, and they came and we had a traditional wedding, and he left with my daughter as a man and a wife. He has been disputing the claims that he's been married to Kaitani, and so there we are. That is on the Daily Nation. And on the Standard newspaper this morning, Ruto scores early win in race to shape IEBC, and it continues to say members of parliament allied to the deputy president have passed a new law that seeks to guide the hiring of electoral commissioners. That is in page 10. Let me just see what that says here, because now the country is in a perennial state of a campaign mode that is not doing us very good here as Kenyans. We just want these people to work for us. Like, we voted in 2017, the elections were disputed, they went to court, we went again to vote a few months later. Why are they putting us through all this pressure of, campaign mode? And the elections are not coming until 2022. So why anybody will be on a campaign mode at this point in time, I don't even understand. And to make matters worse, these are people who are already in the ruling government party, so they should be focusing on delivering to Kenyans the promises they made during, the campaigns for our last elections. And I'm just looking for that story. Let me just read just a line or two there so that we can get the gist of it and understand what it says. So it continues to say that the battle to control the electoral agency ahead of 2022 polls played out in Parliament yesterday when members of Parliament voted to pass a bill in recruitment of commissioners. The lawmakers cast their votes in a clear pattern that demonstrated their current political persuasion. MPs perceived to be allied to Deputy President William Ruto, who voted in support of the Independent Electoral Boundaries and Commission Amendment Bill 2019, carried the day this was a majority of the MPs allied to opposition leader. This was as a majority of members of Parliament allied to opposition leader Raila Odinga voted to reject the bill by the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. Those opposed to the bill had sought to have the carried commissioner sent home to allow for fresh recruitment instead of replacing the 4 who have resigned. Lawmakers from President Uhuru Kenyatta's backyard of Mount Kenya were split, with a handful of them voting against the bill that seeks to provide a mechanism for recruitment of new electoral commissioners whenever vacancies arise. And we've said time and time again, until we are able to have like independent institutions like, say, the electoral body of Kenya, the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, we'll still find ourselves in problem. Until we're able to find an independent judiciary, we'll still be plagued with all this drama that we're seeing right now. So now they're already in Parliament. They are fighting against and voting about the constitution of the electoral body. And like I said, elections are not until 2022. So you wonder. And still on the headlines in the Standard newspaper, Cohen Kin failed to lock Werimo out. So the billionaire's widow outwitted her in-laws and got the chance to lay her husband to rest in private ceremony that was stormed by hundreds of angry and curious onlookers who later stormed the car that whisked her back to prison. So a lot of Kenyans had showed up. It was supposed to be a private family and very close friends, burial there, but some Kenyans found their way near the cemetery, and while the lady was brought from the prison and while she was being taken away, the car that carried her was being stoned because a lot of Kenyans are angry, and there has been allegations and that she was behind the murder of her husband. And so Mr. Todd Cohen was laid to rest yesterday. And all right, so that is on the headlines there. I just want us to go through this quickly, and then we can get into the African stories this morning and read through. I see you, Mr. Abdi Samad Ali. We did not see you here yesterday. We missed you here yesterday. You're saying Uhuru is celebrating today. Femajo said hello to him. No, that's very good. At the end of the day, they're not really enemies. I think it's just a disagreement in interest and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think there's more that binds us together than what pulls us apart. So I am not surprised that happened. And also, you'll be interested to know that Femajo received was it an award? So you stay here, I'll let you know. Him and Afeke of Isaias Afeke of Eritrea, together with Ethiopia, I think a peace award something. I have it in the news, so stay tuned here and we'll talk about it. And I see a lot of engagement here this morning. Ogebe Omoto is saying good morning, Miriam, and you're watching from Germany. Good morning to you. Oh, good morning. Thank you for joining. And Agot Owani, you're saying, are you ready to take the lead of African Springs? I think you're... Okay, I don't know, you're having it. I must have... All right. I think you guys have been having a conversation there, so I can't really follow. And Michael, I think you and somebody else that you're saying, Michael, you're watching from Virginia, United States. What is the way forward of African problems? We need African Springs now before it's too late. And by African Spring now, like the Arab Springs. Is it? All right, and Abule is saying you're watching from New York in the United States of America. And Zakaria Magoki is saying, good morning, Doctor. Doctor is not here with us today, but I am here and I have all the news with us. And I was just going through what is making headlines across Africa this morning, the top 3 daily newspapers, and then we can go straight to looking at the news across Africa. So thank you so much, Abdi Samad. Hello to you too. Thank you so much. And still on the Star newspaper now, there's the same story of Sarah Wairimu telling mourners that Tob Cohen's murderers were at the burial. I've talked about that, so I'll not go through it again. And also the story of Linturi. And now it says, DCI probing Linturi over my missing land title, says Kaitani's mother. I think we've talked about that. Apparently, Linturi went and took the titles of some land there as a collateral for some loan he wanted from a bank, and he's not returned the title deeds. So that is Kaitani's mother there. She had a day in court yesterday, and she was a witness there over this, case that has been happening in the court. And a 73-year-old former Treasury official and daughter killed in South B Estate. Also, that is a very sad story. And also a Catholic nun, why I decided to study and practice law. A Catholic nun here, I think I saw that story. She is a Catholic nun, and she's just graduated, and she's a lawyer now. I don't know, because law is, when you become a lawyer, you defend everybody, from the murderer to the innocent so being that she's a nun, all that, how will she even practice? But she's a civil lawyer, so I don't know how that will work out, because you have to go defend your client, even if you know they're lying. As a lawyer, you have that duty. Even if you know they've murdered, you have that responsibility to go there and defend your clients. I don't know, being that she's a nun, I don't know how this will work out for her. That is on page 12 and 13 on the Star newspaper. I think it's a feature story. Let me just see what's happening with this nun. Yeah, so frustrated by the government's reluctance to provide a title deed to her apostolic order, Sister Leonida Katunge studied civil law to help the faithful, including clergy, protect their properties. Oh, that's very good. So she actually had some inspiration. That is what inspired her to go do that. Well, that's very interesting. If that was her push, then she has something there to achieve. Good for her. And thank you so much, Peter Chimuoba. You're saying all hail Biafra. Did I mention to you there has been suggestions that Biafrans should go to New York, and apparently some are being mobilized and have a protest during the United Nations General Assembly there in New York. I don't know what your thoughts could be on that. Is it the right move by Biafrans to hold a protest there in New York? Because, of course, they're trying to bring this problem to the attention of the world. And Mr. Nnamdi Kanu has been making strides, meeting with the United Nations officials last week in Geneva. Over the weekend, he was in Japan, and right now I think he's in the U.S., if I'm not quite sure, but there has been calls that Biafrans should go and hold protest in New York in front of the United Nations headquarters there in New York. Tell me what you think about it. I want to hear your thoughts on it, and if you've heard about such information. But right now, I just want us to just go through what's making headlines across Africa, and you hear a story and you want to you want us to talk about it more, you know what, just comment there and we'll have this conversation. But let us just go through first, and then we'll come back and talk about it in depth. Then we start with Zimbabwe, where the main water treatment plant in Zimbabwe's capital, which shut down on Monday, is temporarily opened. It is a move which will bring a degree of relief to the city residents at a time when there are also fears of waterborne diseases. A drought has had an impact, but the country's water woes are also linked on the deepening economic crisis in Zimbabwe. The water crisis is a massive inconvenience of the 2 million people living in Harare. Many residents have been forced to queue at night to get water. The opposition-ran Harare City Council blames President Emerson Mnangagwa's government for the economic problems that has meant it cannot afford the chemicals for the water treatment plant. And imagine a whole government cannot afford chemicals for a water treatment plant. That is how things are quite serious there in Zimbabwe. That's very serious. Anyway, we move to Algeria, where Said Bouteflika, the brother of Algeria's deposed president, has been sentenced to 15 years in jail. After a 2-day trial, it has been confirmed he was a key figure among Algeria's leadership until President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was forced to resign in April following a pro-democracy protest. Two former Secret Service chiefs and the leader of a political party were also given 15 years jail term by the military court in Blida. a city south of the capital, Algiers. Prosecutors have had asked for the maximum sentence of 20 years to be handed down to all four, defense lawyer Maloud Ibrahim said, according to the AFP news agency. And we go to Nigeria, where a lawyer for the Nigerian political activist Omoyole Sowore, who has been in detention for more than 7 weeks, says he is still trying to secure his client's release hours after a court in the capital Abuja ordered for the immediate release. Mr. Sowore, who did not appear at Tuesday's hearing, is facing charges of treason, money laundering, and insulting the president. He publishes the online newspaper Sahara Reporters and was a candidate in the last presidential elections. The 48-year-old was arrested in early August for trying to organize nationwide anti-government protests under the slogan, the hashtag Revolution Now. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari's administration is facing criticism for its human rights record, especially following a brutal campaign against the Shia protesters. A high court in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, has ordered for his immediate release of the publisher, but of course, the government has not complied yet. And we go to South Africa, where South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has pledged to step up efforts to preserve indigenous languages that are dying out in the country. Speaking in South Africa's Northern Cape province on Heritage Day, an official holiday to celebrate the nation's diversity, Mr. Ramaphosa added that over the last few years, the government had reduced the number of public schools that do not teach an African language from 2,500 to just over 460. By the end of the next year, all of the South Africans, 23,000 schools, public schools, would offer an African language, he said. I don't know how that will work out. An African language when they're not even accommodative of other Africans. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts about that. And in Zimbabwe, police in Zimbabwe are preventing a union leader from heading to South Africa to receive medical treatment as he recovers from alleged abduction. This comes hours after the High Court ordered the police to allow Mr. Peter Magombei to leave the country. Rights activists and local media are reporting that police are currently blocking him from leaving a medical facility in the capital, Harare. Earlier this month, Mr. Magombei's colleagues said he was abducted by state agents after he had organized a health workers' strike. 5 days later, he was found alive but extremely disoriented. His apparent abduction was the latest in a series of disappearances of government critics, some of whom have been tortured. And a leading security analyst in Ghana has cast doubts on government claims of a coup plot. Adam Bonner told the BBC that factors which normally lead to an attempt to overthrow a government, such as massive fuel shortages and mass agitations, were not present. The Ministry of Information said a 15-month investigation by security officers had uncovered a plot to take over the reins of government there in Ghana. And 6 members of Egypt's banned Muslim Brotherhood have been killed in a shootout with police on the outskirts of capital Cairo, the Interior Ministry has said. Protests against alleged corruption in President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's regime broke out in several Egyptian cities at the weekend. State media accused the Muslim Brotherhood of influencing the protesters, and this is something we will talk about in a very short while. And still in Egypt, and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has made a passionate appeal for a concerted effort in Libya. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Tuesday, Sisi said this effort was necessary to put an end to interference from outside actors in the country. Egypt is an ally to Khalifa Haftar, who has been leading an offensive on Tripoli for months. Training camps have said he has set training camps in Egypt near the Libyan border. And leaders from 3 states in the Horn of Africa have been honored by a US-based non-profit organization for their efforts to bring peace in the region. 3 presidents, Eritrea's Isaias Afwerki, Ethiopian Sahle Work Zewde, and Somali's Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo are the joint recipients of the 2019 Concordia Leadership Award. The leaders have been involved in efforts to achieve peace in the troubled region and to integrate the economies of the 3 countries. President Farmajo received the award on behalf of Mr. Isaias and Ms. Sahlel Work at the 2019 Concordia Annual Summit in New York City. So there you have it, Mr. Abdi Samad. I hope you're still there. And we go to Rwanda, where the country will host the 26th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, signaling an important step for a country which was admitted to the group a dozen years ago. The Commonwealth Secretariat on Tuesday released a video announcing Kigali as the next host of the bloc, and the Commonwealth, commonly referred to as the club, is composed mostly of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, 52 other countries, mostly English-speaking former colonies of the United Kingdom. So Rwanda was never colonized by the UK, so we'll talk about it and see how is it that they are part of the Commonwealth now. And we go to Guinea, where President Alpha Conde of Guinea has called on the public to prepare for a referendum and elections, stirring speculation that he will seek to overcome a constitutional ban on a third term in office. In a video posted on social media late Monday, the 81-year-old president said, "I ask you to get organized and prepare for a referendum and elections." Conde on Monday met with members of the Guinean community in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Conde's second term, the maximum under the current constitution, expires on October 2020, but he has repeatedly questioned the value of term limits. Don't they all, well, not all, but majority of our leaders here in Africa. And we go to South Sudan, where a member of the Transitional National Legislative Assembly says some South Sudanese leaders have not been taking their jobs seriously. Honorable Mary Kiden, who represents Kajo KG in Yei River State, believes that lack of commitment by leaders of South Sudan has led to the 5-year conflict, as she attributes it to the inexistence of federal system of governance in the country. I'm not surprised. She said the leaders, they are not very serious. I'm really not surprised. I think I've been saying that over and over here. And some news about Biafra and the indigenous people of Biafra. IPOB has vowed to protest against President Muhammadu Buhari and his government during the 74th United Nations General Assembly in the United States this week. According to the pro-Biafra group, the essence of the protest was to stand against the continued onslaught, arrest, and secret abduction of its members by agents allegedly sponsored by the federal government of Nigeria. The IPOB also said the protest will serve to prove the entire world its resoluteness and determination to achieve an independent state of Biafra, free from impunity, corruption, poverty, and human rights abuses. And I'll read you part of the statement as we continue with this conversation here. And we go to end with Ambazonia, where Ambazonia leaders in Fako Division Southwest region of Cameroon are due to participate at the major national dialogue convened by President Paul Biya through telephone conferencing, reports have said. And according to reports, the separatists in Fako Division have entered a commitment to partake in the national dialogue, primarily aimed at seeking solutions to the Anglophone crisis through a telephone conference. The commitment of the Ambazonia fighters, reports say, is part of the contribution from the Fako Conference of Traditional Rulers given to the governor of the Southwest region. Now, that is a bit confusing, but we'll also talk about all of that. So that is the latest from Africa this morning. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me this morning. So okay, let me just appreciate some of you. I see you here. There's this conversation between Ogebe Omot and Agwot. I can't even start following it from up there, but I see you guys have been engaging here. And Ogebe, something you're saying, Zimbabwe government is not serious about the citizens. Why can't supply chemical products for farmers? This is not even for farmers. Like, this is for a water treatment facility for the water that serves Harare, the capital city. So yesterday the plant was closed but opened temporarily because the population there was lacking water, and this is brought about by the deepening economic crisis in Zimbabwe. Things are not very good there, and of course the water crisis is a massive inconvenience for the 2 million people living in Harare. You can imagine, without clean water, what that would mean. Waterborne diseases might erupt because people might go looking for other waters that even are more unsafe. So the government cannot afford water treatment chemicals for a water plant for the capital city. That is a problem. And President Mnangagwa there has a lot on his plate right now. And what you're saying, Michael, Uncle Museveni, the Pan-Africanism brother, Uhuru, General Salva Kiir and General Kagame will strip you in the daylight. Wallahi lazima. I don't know what you're talking about. Seven is a Pan-Africanist. Yeah, well, he is. He claims to be. I think he's one of the people who believes in. Yes, in Pan-Africanism, and he advances the ideology of Pan-Africanism, which is also a good thing. But at the same, the same time, the things that he does, I think, I don't know. Maybe our leaders. I don't know how. When you look at somebody like Museveni, and of course he is known to be a Pan-African, but does it do that or say that because he wants to keep the external forces, especially the from Europe and the other side of the world, out of Ugandan politics, because he does not want to be questioned about his his records and his leadership in Uganda. So when it comes to that, he says, "Oh no, I am a Pan-African, so you have no place here in Uganda." I don't know if that is what really advises, his ideology on but he is known to be a great Pan-Africanist. But the things that he does, I think, goes against, lack of democracy, human rights abuse. There's no space, even media freedom in Uganda is just a mirage. It clearly does not even exist when you look at the things that have been happening in Uganda. So when he says he's a Pan-Africanist, is it just a protection or a defense mechanism of keeping some players out of Uganda and and him being in cahoots with other perceived Pan-African leaders who don't really advance really the ideology of developing Africa that much, but they hide in that a title of Pan-Africanist because they want to protect each other. What is it? I don't understand. You tell me what that means. But yeah, I've seen your comment there, and you're saying he's a great Pan-Africanist. Yes, he is, but is it a defense mechanism? Is it because he wants to keep the other people out there and he does not want, especially the white people, telling him how to lead Uganda and to criticize his governance style and to criticize the lack of democracy in Uganda and other ills that Uganda, goes through there? So I don't know. You'd let me know what that means. And when he says he's a Pan-Africanist, of course he is. I'm not doubting that. Temple Raymond, thank you so much. And you're saying we're doing a great job. And thank you so much. And that is about Zimbabwe. And now some problems, of course, in Algeria. And Said Bouteflika, the brother of former Algerian, President Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika, was arrested. Yesterday was in court, and after a 2-day court session, he was handed a 15-year term jail there. And of course, the prosecutors had asked for a maximum of 20 years, but he was given, 15 years. So that is still a lot of years. So, Algerians have been on the street, but I love the way their protests have been organized. They protest every Friday, so they get to work, they get to do other things, go to work and be productive. But on Fridays, I think after the prayers at the mosques, they head to the streets, and it's been like that for now since the start of the year. You remember when President Bouteflika did not want to step down, the 83-year-old, he had suffered a stroke a couple of years ago. He was not able to function well and even carry out his responsibilities as the head of state in Algeria, but he was still insisting on going for another term, and he had already led for 20 years. You wonder, what is it that you've not done in 20 years that you think you're going to do now that you're not even okay and you're not well physically? And so he was in and out of the country for treatment. And the last time he went, I think, was in February to Switzerland for 2 weeks. He came back. After he left, the protest started. And so it persisted until he was able to step down, I think somewhere in April, after many years. He had said, you know what, then I'll go run, and then halfway I'll step down after half a term after I've run for the elections. And the protesters said, no, we want you out and out completely. So finally he bowed to pressure after the army came out and supported the protesters. When you're a head of state and the army is no longer on your side, protection is gone. So he had to write a letter of resignation. He was forced to do that. He did not want to do that. So now you'd wonder why are Algerians still on the streets after the president they did not want had stepped down. Why is it they continue, protesting? Because elections were scheduled to take place in July, on 4th of July, but they refused to participate because the people that were supposed to be giving the names to vie for the presidency of that country refused to do that. So the ones who came in last minute did not meet the criteria. So they refused. No elections are going to take place until they want some reforms happen, because the protesters were saying, how can we have an election while the same officials who were part of Bouteflika's administration and were part of the corruption that plagued Algeria are the ones who are going to head this election? So they refused that elections are not going to happen. So now a new date has been given, that is in December, and they're still out there protesting. So we see that the military, who is now at the top of the reins of leading Algeria, is really bowing to the pressure of the protesters, and the protesters have insisted anybody that was part of Bouteflika's government must go and should go, and they're not going. That is not something that they're willing even to take a compromise on. And so we've seen a lot of millionaires from Algeria, a lot of people who are very close because they amassed wealth in perhaps ways that are not okay, through corruption and other means, being that they were part of the regime. We've seen a lot of them being thrown to jail. We've seen a lot of them going through the court process, and a lot of them have been given jail terms. And the latest one, of course, is Said Bouteflika, the brother to Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the former president. And of course, he was given 15 years, and he's been charged with money laundering and corruption, among other charges that were preferred. Of course, the court process took about 2 days. So they are giving in to the protesters' demands, and so because they just want Algeria to come back to normal. So, but what I'm really impressed by the manner in which Algerians are really protesting. They're very careful not to halt any important services in the country. They're very careful not to bring the economy to their knees. They're very careful not to hurt the country, because you see, they're only protesting one day, that is every Friday, and they have been very consistent, and they come out in numbers, not every day. Every Friday, they're out in the streets. So they're able to go to work, they're able to go to school, they're able to just carry out their duties. But on Friday, they are committed to coming out in the streets of Algiers and across, Algeria, and protest. And it's been very organized, and they have been very clear about their demands. And the fact that the army and the people who are now responsible for the leadership there in Algeria, they seem to be agreeing with what the protesters are saying, and we've not heard any chaos there since the protest began. We've not heard any killings. We've not heard any looting. We've not heard any police brutality. So I really must commend Algeria. I think that is what democracy looks like. That is a very mature country in terms of democracy, because a lot of countries here in this continent by now will be counting dead bodies. All these sustained protests from the beginning of the year till now, and they're very consistent. Even the army would have gotten tired with you, but I think perhaps because I don't know if there are any external influence there. I don't think, and even if not quite much. As in the case of what was happening in Sudan, we saw a lot of countries had interest, and a lot of allies had interest, and the former allies of former President Omar al-Bashir, and we saw. So there are a lot of interest with other external forces and interference from other countries, especially in the UAE, Saudi Arabia. We saw Qatar. We saw, and of course other countries outside. So had a lot of interest in Sudan, and that is why we saw things turn out the way they turned out. And on the 3rd of June, a very peaceful protest was marked to be the brutality, and the police came down through the rapid Sudan forces. The Janjaweed came out and killed a number of protesters. So that is the difference between what happened in Sudan. And I'm happy that Sudan has been able to salvage the situation. Right now, the normalcy seems to have returned. Of course, we wait after 3 years where the first election will happen. But at least right now, they have a prime minister, and they're working together with, I think, the army. And of course, we know that Sudan's, constitution was suspended, just before the president was disposed. And so they're working on a new constitution. And what was in contention is what will constitute this new constitution, because what was there before was not working well, especially for the liberal Sudanese. It was not working very well. So apparently the army was suggesting, because a lot of them were allied to Omar al-Bashir, and they were suggesting that the constitution, a lot of it should be based on the Sharia law, and the protesters, which of course Sudan is predominantly a Muslim country, but they are liberal, so they're saying no. They're liberal Muslims, I guess. So they're saying no, we don't want a country that is Sharia based, because that will mean something else, in terms of the space you have to express yourself, in terms of a lot of things will be curtailed. So that was a bone of contention between the protesters and the military, and that was among the issues that topped the disagreement and the delay even in the signing of the pact that finally brought them together. So they're still working on the constitution, as I mentioned there. They don't have a constitution as we speak right now in Sudan. It was suspended, so they're working on getting a new constitution that will serve Sudan and will, the people of Sudan. So there it is. So as I said there, Algeria, what has been happening there, I think is quite impressive. We've not heard of a crisis. We've not heard of anything. We just see them protest and they go back to their normal lives the rest of the days. And so that is commendable there, and we have to commend the people of Algeria for putting the country first. In other African countries right now, the reports you'll be hearing, there have been looting, burning of things, and killing of word and militia groups and word. So this is very good. And if you feel that you need to protest, I think you could borrow a leaf from Algeria and see how they've been able to do this, sustain a protest from the beginning of the year. And right now we are heading towards the last quarter of the year, and we've not had any chaos at all in Algeria. So that is something that we commend so much. And as an African, I think I'm proud that such level of maturity and democracy can be allowed space here in Africa to thrive, and people can be allowed to express their discontent without anybody coming after them and harming them. So that is very good news there from Algeria. And of course, Nigeria, before I put this paper away and go to another one, a lawyer for the Nigerian political activist Omoyele Sowore, who has been detained for more than 7 weeks, says he's still trying to secure. Remember, the High Court in Nigeria, capital Abuja there, ordered for the immediate release of this. He's also a publisher, and apparently he ran for the last presidential elections, and now the 48-year-old was arrested in August for trying to organize a national-wide anti-government protest. See, that is what happens when you organize an anti-government protest in some African countries. You are arrested and then put without even trial, and then these very ridiculous charges brought against you. So this guy was being charged. What were the charges that were preferred against him? Very serious charges here against this Mr. Sowore. I'm just trying to... he was charged with treason, and that attracts like the capital, whatever. That attracts like a life sentence. That is a capital, offense. So he was charged with treason and money laundering and insulting the president. Did he insult? I did not see. Maybe I don't know. I did not see that. But if you know what he called the president, if it's not too bad, please don't share it here. But he was put in jail because he was insulting the president. Maybe he was just criticizing the president. And people criticize even the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, here every day and in other countries. But when you see a person that is intolerant, cannot even take criticism, it's a problem. And you can't even protest. Like I mentioned earlier there in Algeria. In Nigeria now, you can't even protest. So Mr. Omoyele Sowore had started a protest, and he called it #RevolutionNow because of the many things that are happening. And of course, President Muhammadu Buhari administration is facing criticism for its human rights record, especially following a brutal campaign. We've been seeing the Shia Muslim community protesters being, meted with a lot of force from the Nigerian police. I don't know if that has stopped. Please let me know. And so we await the release of Omoyele Sowore there. So I don't know what's your thoughts on that. The High Court ordered for his immediate release, but the government has not complied with that. So if the government, which is supposed to be the custodian of the Constitution, goes against an order that has been given, if the government cannot respect the constitution, how does it expect, other citizens of Nigeria to respect the constitution? If the High Court in Abuja yesterday said this guy should be released immediately with no conditions, and you still continue to hold him, what sense? That is ridiculous. And then what does that mean in terms of constitutionalism here in Africa? I know there's been a unconstitutional coup, and you see that when our leaders insist on having third terms, as we will look at when we'll be looking at now Guinea, and Alpha Conde does not want to go anywhere. And also in Tanzania, I think there's somebody else who has gone to High Court to compel to change what was his argument? But he was saying that President Pombe Magufuli should be allowed another third term. But President Pombe Magufuli has come out and said no, he's okay. In fact, he wants to leave like yesterday. Once his term is up, he wants to leave. But this Tanzanian has gone to court and said, okay, this president has been doing very well, and we want him to continue. But what does the Constitution say? The Constitution says 2-term limits, period. The Constitution in Tanzania, the Constitution in Kenya, and I believe the Constitution in a lot of African countries. And when leaders tried to change this, that is what brought problems in Burundi, when President Pierre Nkurunziza went and changed the Constitution, and increased the number of years, and messed up with the term limits. And so he put 7 years for a term in Burundi. So that is what brought Burundi into a lot of problems there in 2015. And we see this is something that agitates, as much as you're a good leader, also the citizens I don't know if they understand. Fine, you've done your part. Leave. We want to see somebody else come and try also. If you don't like him or she, or they don't serve us very well, then I don't think the Constitution bars anybody from running again. We've seen that, I don't know, but depends on the member states, on the different countries. But I think there should be, if he thinks he worked very well or she thinks she worked very well, then maybe they can be allowed to come back after somebody else has served, but not a continuous. Now you think, okay, I'm here now, and I don't want to leave because I think I'm serving this country very well, and perhaps the people there don't even want you to be there. So it's ridiculous. This third term hangover that a lot of our leaders have, it's ridiculous. And so there it is. And we will talk about it when we look at Guinea. And so Mr. Sowore there ran against President Muhammadu Buhari in elections in February, and he came 10th out of the more than 70 candidates. Nigerians, you even try. Sorry, you had 70 presidential candidates in February. Wow. And this guy came 10th. I guess he did well. I don't know. You tell me. So presidents, as South African president, yesterday they were marking the Heritage Day, and the president said now he wants in South Africa to introduce like every public school to study at least one African language should be made part of the syllabus. And I'm thinking, one African language to be made of part of the syllabus of South African education curriculum? These people who are so intolerant, will they even want to study, or will that help? I don't know. Will this help them in embracing other Africans? Will this, maybe if they learned their language and their culture and their way of life, are they not taught that in history class or whatever classes that is supposed to be taught? But now the president says that African language should be introduced. So will this help in terms of South Africans being more accepting and being more open-minded, learning languages from other African countries? Will this help in ending the terrible xenophobia that has been happening there, the hate against other Black Africans from other African countries? Will this help in changing their mindset? Because I think these people have not gotten over apartheid. The hate that was meted against them, that they were shown, the segregation that they were segregated for a very long time, and the hate that was shown towards them, I think they've never really gotten out of it. And because they feel that they can't go there and start beating these people who did that to them, or they cannot. And so they think, who are we going to attack next? How are we going to vent our anger or our feeling of discrimination? So we are going to discriminate because. Have you ever heard of the saying, hurt people hurt people? Yeah, when you've been hurt and that's all you know, sometimes people are not able to get over that. But until when? Because South Africa has now been independent has been led by, has since apartheid ended 25 years ago. Until when are they going to have this feeling? What else needs to be done for them to heal from these bad things that happened to them, during apartheid? And why are they using even this as an excuse to fight their fellow Africans? Their fellow Africans, if anything, were just there for them. I don't think contributed to the misery that they were going through during the minority white man rule there in South Africa. Other Africans were there for South Africans, so it's not reason at all. And I keep calling it foolishness and madness, because there's nothing that warrants. I cannot even. There's no excuse for what is happening there in South Africa. So President Ramaphosa yesterday suggested that, perhaps learning other African languages might be a good thing for South Africa. Let's see if they will even want to do that. If they're so intolerant of other Africans, you think they'll start learning Swahili, or they'll start learning another language from Congo, or another language from Nigeria, or another language? You think they would even want to do that? I don't know. I don't think they're that open-minded. And hurt people. So that's all they know. So they need to find a way to heal and liberate themselves from this self-inflicted, prison that they are in, and start looking at the world differently, and seize the opportunities that these foreigners come there and see, and take a risk in. They should start doing that, so that if at all we were to achieve this dream of having a one united Africa, which I said yesterday, that's quite a tall dream, and we are very far away from achieving it, judging by the leaders we have in this continent and their priorities. I don't think that is even something they want to talk about. So we go to, of course, Zimbabwe again, and one of leaders, a health leader there, police are now preventing him. He was abducted, and now he was found 5 days after his abduction. And he wanted to go for treatment in South Africa. This whole story, I don't know why I'm smelling something just more than, or maybe it's just my journalistic, instincts. So now he wants to go to South Africa. For me, I think he wanted to flee. I don't know. He wants to go to South Africa to receive medical treatment as he recovers from alleged abduction. This comes hours after the High Court ordered the police to allow Mr. Peter Magumbe. So this Peter Magumbe was leading, Dr. Magumbe was planning to lead a protest, and earlier this month, his colleagues said he was abducted by state agents after he had organized a health workers' strike. 5 days later, he was found alive but extremely disoriented, so it appears that he was not okay. So he's saying that he wants to go to seek treatment in South Africa. And just as we mentioned there in Zimbabwe, they lack even the basic of, when you go to the hospitals right now, they're not fully, they don't have all the medication, and you see the doctors are always on strike, so they don't have the health sector. There has been very affected. So if you want proper treatment, you might not get it in Zimbabwe. So that is the crisis that normal Zimbabweans find themselves in, who cannot travel or fly to another country to seek for treatment. So this doctor, actually, his flight was already booked yesterday, but the police refused to release him to go for treatment in South Africa. I think there's more to this story, yes, and I will keep you up to date as this story continues. But I think that perhaps the doctor just wanted to, to disappear, to run away and go seek for asylum there in South Africa. I don't know, but he said he wanted to go for treatment there. I don't know, because he did not trust the facilities in Zimbabwe, but also the facilities in Zimbabwe are not the best right now. So I don't know. So this is a story that I'll be keeping in touch with. Agot Awanyo saying, I disagree with him on that. Learning another African language wouldn't be any solution at all. They must know Africans are not their problems, but those took their 80% of lands are their problems. Exactly. So I don't know. And I was just wondering, if they can't even tolerate other Africans, how are they going to learn Swahili, for instance? How would they even care? to learn it. Let me see. I got you also saying the Rwanda president has extended his leaders to some 7 years, I think. Tanzania president is great. Yes, and the Rwandese president, it's just yesterday here I was reading that somebody who was becoming very popular, an opposition figure, was murdered, was stabbed, and he died. And today I was reading that they found 2 suspected killers who might have done that, but the government has not given any more information about that. And you're saying the assassination of John Garang in July 30th, 2005, and Bashir has hand on. Now that Dr. Garang said happened in Khartoum. Oh, what did he say? For now, Rwandan president and Tanzania president is the 2 guys who are not bad yet. The rest of Africa leaders are criminals and needs to be in prison. I think in Rwanda it's a working dictatorship. I don't know. But I'm told you can't even speak ill of the government there. They will get you. And if you want to run for presidency, Paul Kagame has to look at your credentials and agree and give a nod if at all you qualify. What is that? Maybe I just appreciate too much democracy here in Kenya. You speak our mind. So when I hear things like that I don't understand how that could work. Say in a country like Kenya, never. And so, yes, there it is. So yesterday there were reports that the government of Ghana had gotten hold of a couple of people who were planning to overthrow the current sitting government. But if you would seen the people that were, held yesterday and the kind of even weapons they had, because initially what the government had given, you'd think these people had tankers and grenades, and they had all these sophisticated military equipment. But when you see the arms these people had, the ones you'll find maybe with cattle rustlers somewhere in Turkana or Baringo there, they didn't look like people who had the capability to overturn a government that has a full-fledged proper military like Ghana. So these claims have many people have come out and said, come on now, this does not make any sense. And when they brought the evidence with these people and they made it public, come on. So a lot of people has cast doubt on that attempted coup claim by the Ghanaian government there. So I don't know why the government will do that. But there has been some Ghanaians part of that have not been very contented with the manner in which Ghana things have been done. And so they've been calling for secession. Of course, the government has been coming very hard on them, and that's why it has not made major news. But there are a few disgruntled section of Ghanaian public there that are not very happy with the government as it is. So maybe that could be the organizers of this attempted coup that claims by the government could be part of that group. But I don't know. I know I can see a lot of Biafrans here, and we have some news. And like I said earlier, there has been some reports that Biafra is calling for protest at New York during the United Nations General Assembly. It's happening right now. So I don't know what would be your thoughts on that. Let me know what you think. Is it a good move by Biafra? Do you support it? What are your thoughts on that? But I'll get to that. But I'd like for us to look at what's happening in Egypt this afternoon. I think it's afternoon right now. Yes, it is. And so during the United Nations General Assembly yesterday, Mr. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the AU chairperson there, gave a very passionate appeal for a concerted effort in Libya. And, I watched that speech, and I just watched that speech, and I could not even believe my ears what I was hearing this person saying. Now, he was speaking at the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday, and Sisi said this effort was necessary, the concerted effort towards getting a peace in Libya. He said this effort was necessary to put an end to interference from outside actors in the country. So when he said to put to an end interference from actors outside of the country, I said, what? But are you pointing at yourself? Because it's now an open secret that al-Sisi and Egypt, they are quite involved in the matters and the chaos that is happening in Libya. The government that is UN recognized is being fought by Khalifa Haftar, right? This is the government that is UN recognized at the UN where Al-Sisi was making this speech. And guess what? Mr. Al-Sisi himself is supporting Khalifa Haftar, the ones who are fighting the UN recognized government in Libya. So when he was making this speech, I didn't even understand what he meant by that. But he's saying that the country the country has outside interference, and a concerted effort in Libya was necessary. And he was making this very passionate appeal, and I was just sitting there not even believing my ears what I was hearing, because Al-Sisi is part of the outside interference that is continuing to fuel chaos in Libya. And being that he's the African Union chairperson, he's not. There's a lot. I don't even know how this Libya matter is going to be solved. I don't think it will be solved under Al-Sisi as the current chair. Perhaps the next chairship after him, maybe somebody else, but not Al-Sisi, because he has interest in Libya, which is heavy. And of course, he's been saying that Khalifa Haftar has been fighting against especially some groups or militants that are perceived to be from Muslim Brotherhood, I think. And he's been fighting members of Muslim Brotherhood. Remember, the former president, who is now late, he died earlier this year, Mohamed Morsi. The guy died, and he was a leader of Muslim Brotherhood. And we can see even the manner the Egyptian government handled his death. No even official announcement was allowed, even in the major news outlets in Egypt. And he was treated as if, he didn't matter, like he was never head of state in Egypt, so it angered some members of Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know what he expected. So we saw some protests and some prayer vigils being held across in Turkey and other, countries that Muslim Brotherhood has sort of a footing. And so now his claim of supporting Khalifa Haftar is because Khalifa Haftar is fighting against such people there in Egypt. But at the same time, he's fighting the UN-backed government in Libya. So he's fighting the UN-backed government in Libya, and Sisi is there supporting Haftar to fight that government. And now he is at the UN making this passionate appeal about the stopping of external interference in Libya. I don't understand the intricacies and the politicking and the interference, and that has brought Libya to where it is today. Of course, at least 60,000 people, most of them members of the now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, are reported to have been detained in the past 6 years. That is in Egypt. Of course, we saw last week on Friday and Saturday there were some protests there in Egypt, and a good number of Egyptians were back to Tahrir Square, the famous Tahrir Square. And they're protesting, and they're saying Mr. Al-Sisi's government is plagued with corruption and other things. And so right now, a lot of them have been, yesterday reported, over 500 of them have been arrested. And now 6 members of the Egypt's banned Muslim Brotherhood group have been killed. Yesterday, they were killed by police. I don't know if this will help calm things down, or that will just act as a fuel to something else that might get out of control. So we see 6 members there of the banned Muslim Brotherhood group were killed yesterday in Cairo there. So I don't know how that will work. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, former President Mohamed Morsi was the leader of this Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, he changed the party to something else, but still it was Muslim Brotherhood. And I don't know how that will work. By now, the Egyptian authority killing these people. Will that not incite more emotions and more need for revenge or some counterattacks by, the other side, the Muslim Brotherhood group, who might think these people are being killed, but they did nothing wrong. So, when you have to be very careful, especially when you're dealing with wars that are, laced with ideology, that are embedded with ideology. It's very difficult, And that is why Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram continue to do what they do, and they're ready and willing to die, because they're driven by ideology, by something they believe in very, very strongly. So you cannot tell them otherwise. So ideological wars, I think you must be very careful in how you fight them, if at all you want to win. And we see what's happening in Nigeria right now with the flourishing of Boko Haram under President Muhammadu Buhari's watch. You are the best. Are you saying, oh, it's his birthday? Is it Namdi Kanu's birthday? I didn't know that. HBD, you're saying you're wishing him a happy birthday? Okay. All right, Sour. I didn't know. Not so late, Linus. Thank you. I didn't know it was Ogochukwu Kanu, you're saying we're willing to cooperate with all Africans. We love all Africans. Biafra is for everybody. All right. The Egyptians leader don't want the involvement of non-Arabs. So non-Arabs. But who will that be? Because I think France has been mentioned and very, very extensively, and it appears it has also stakes there. Well, they had a fight. Even Italy came out and called out France and said, you need to get yourself out of Libya. But because Libya also, because Italy has been benefiting, has been partners, and Libya has been its great source of oil, so they all have interest there. So when they're fighting out there, they're not fighting because they love us so much, because they're trying to protect their interests, and that is the bottom line. Yes, so they do not want a non-Arab state to be involved. Okay, so that is what they perceive to be external force, external influence. Is that what they're saying by saying they do not want external influence? So that could be. So if you're not an Arab, so you are an external influence. It does not matter. Okay. But what does that even mean? So anyway, let's look at other news. And of course, as I mentioned there earlier, we'll come to Biafra and Ambazonia in a short bit. But let's look at Rwanda, Guinea, and then South Sudan. So in Rwanda, the country will host the 26th Commonwealth Heads of State meeting, signaling an important step for the country. Of course, Rwanda was never colonized by the British. They joined the Commonwealth. I think they applied to join the Commonwealth in about 12 years ago. And so it's interesting, German, of course, Rwanda was colonized by Germany, and then followed by Belgium, which invaded the country in 1916 during the World War I, and both European nations, of course, ruled through the kings and perpetuated a pro-Tutsi policy. So these Europeans, in just a bit of history down memory lane, we understand perhaps where Rwanda is today. When Germany, though the first colonizers of Rwanda, and then they were followed by Belgium. So all these colonialists were advancing, seemed to be very friendly to the Tutsi, and they were advancing a pro-Tutsi policy. And so the Hutu did not like that very much. So you can understand why the genocide even had to happen. So it started during the time of colonialism, and the colonists must have, planted these seeds of discord. Because if you are going to favor one community against the other one, what are you doing? At the end of the day, one part will feel very disgruntled. So it started during colonization, and Germany, who were the first colonizers, then came the Belgium. They all were in favor, and all the policy they were making seems to have been favoring Tutsi. And the Hutu population, of course, revolted the first time in 1959. And that acrimony, I think, continued until other things were happening, until what happened, the sad genocide that happened in 1994 that left over 1 million people dead. And of course, it was targeting the Tutsi population, the Twa, and also the moderate Hutus. There were killed over 1 million people. So you can see this started. So of course, now Rwanda joined the Commonwealth. It joined about 12 years ago, and she will be hosting the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting there next year. So that is a good news for Rwanda. So I think we're just having that conversation there of President Paul Kagame. I don't know. I think people think he's working very well, and I hear Rwanda is advanced, which is a good thing, but also you can't even, it's a country you can't speak freely. People live in fear, but I don't know if I guess it's working for them. And okay, but you're saying Egyptian people, they are on fire, brotherhood, they don't fear to rallying around globally. I think they don't fear. And if Al-Sisi's government continues, of course, with these killings of the Muslim Brotherhood, he will not be solving anything. As I mentioned earlier, these ideological wars are very costly, because they're not just wars over borderlines and over war. It's embedded in ideology, in a certain ideology that a person believes in, and they're ready to die for. So Al-Sisi continues with this manner of handling this, disgruntled Egyptians from especially the Muslim Brotherhood. He might be preparing for something that he might not be able to to take care of. And he should not sit pretty. We saw Mohammed Morsi being removed by the military, and so he should be very careful in the manner in which the government goes about, especially handling these things. And when you read members have been killed, you're just causing more agitation from the people who might be feeling these are innocent people, and so we have to go out there and revenge or something like that. So you're just hardening, their belief in, if anything. So that might not work very well and might be very counterproductive for Al-Sisi's government. So let's look at Guinea, and President Alpha Conde has called on the public to prepare for a referendum and elections, stirring speculations that he will be seeking to overcome a constitutional ban on a third-term office. Now, President Alpha Conde, and I think we've talked about this when we were talking about Tanzania, and one of Tanzanian member of public going to the High Court, he's compelling the court to allow President Pombe Magufuli to go for another term because his term is ending very soon. And it's very clear in Tanzania, only 2 terms that you can run as a president. So is Guinea, so is Kenya, so is, Uganda. There's no presidential term limits, and we are seeing what is happening in Uganda. Burundi took them off. We are seeing what is happening over there. Rwanda, Kagame is a president for life. Well, there seems to be a perceived peace and whatever, but if people are to be honest with you, it's not all glossy and lovely over there. But so we understand. So countries that suppress democracy and suppress, the space for more people to be allowed to even into leadership, it's not very good. And Guinea has been relatively been quiet and all that. So but when President Alpha Conde is insisting that the country should prepare for another referendum so that they vote to allow another term limit, that might plunge the country into something else, like what happened in Burundi in 2015, the attempted coup. Because if you insist on staying here, guess what? We might as well try to throw you out very, very quickly. Sometimes people get tired. Citizens of these African countries, we get very exhausted sometimes. And when we've had enough of you, we've had enough of you. So you cannot force yourselves to us. And so when you see President Alpha Conde now, who is 81 years old, still wants to have a referendum to change the term limits of the country. What he is forgetting now is that he is the president, and fine, he might serve, and then the next time he might be voted out, or they might change it, and then people will go to election, or he might not be voted, and then somebody else will come who might not be that, who might not be very good for that country or whatever. So he might not even be the one who will benefit from that. Somebody else will come. And now what will happen? Will you go back again to a referendum and change the constitution, mutilate the constitution again so that you go back to the term limits, or what happens there? So there has been this constitutional coup that has been happening across Africa. The lack of leadership of Africa in respecting the various constitutions is what brings Africa to the crisis that we witness in a lot of our countries, and the chaos that is happening in Africa today. The leaders, they do not want to respect the law. They have no regard for the constitution. They have no regard for the laws that protects the lands and helps people in the manner in which you run a country or the country operates. So when you feel this law is not working for me and I have to go there and repeal it, or I have to force it down the people and have a referendum, which probably will be marred with corruption to make sure that it passes, you're forcing yourself on the people. And if you think you're that good, how about they elect somebody else, and then after that election, you can come back for a re-election if you really think you're good. And we see these people who do not want to leave power. They create all these crises in Africa, and this should be unacceptable. And I don't even know why. As the other African leaders are not even coming out and criticizing such moves. And, this might plunge Guinea into unnecessary problems, unnecessary wars that might affect that country even further. So, of course, Conde's second term, the maximum under the present constitution, is supposed to be ending in 2020. But the guy thinks, I'm too good. I still need to sit here and serve Guinea. But maybe the people, has he asked the people who he's serving if they still want him to be there? Are they ever concerned about our views and how we want to be led even? Or they just, of course, they're there to serve their own interests. Otherwise, you would respect the Constitution, and the continued disrespect of the Constitution is, is what is affecting. It's like a plague here in this continent. And we see Al-Sisi also went and mutilated the Constitution, and now he'll be in power for until over 2030, still, 2034, I guess. He'll still be there. For what? And you see the kind of things that he's doing today. So now what if these protests are sustained and they continue and he's out of power? So what will happen? The other person will come and might serve the term remaining to where he wanted to serve, or even further. So when they make or suggest to make such changes, what worries me is they just look at the present, and the present is them. But they don't look at, okay, fine, should I leave office? Would I want to see somebody else come here and serve without endlessly, and serve even if he's a bad person? Would I create a situation where somebody will come here, and whether he's good or not good for the country, but he will have an endless, service to this country, and might not do the country They don't think about tomorrow and the next day and the next generation and the next years to come. They look at the immediate need and the immediate greed that they have to gratify at that time, and that is for them to stick to power for their own personal gains. So Mr. Alpha Conde there, the president of Guinea, I think Guineans should come out to refuse this kind of constitutional coup. I think Guineans should, and I think soon, I'm here, I bring you the news every day. I'm sure we'll start reporting about protests happening in Guinea there, because I don't think they will agree. And of course, he was in a video posted on social media late Monday. The 81-year-old president asked, he said, I'll quote him, "I ask you to get organized and prepare for a referendum and elections." And Conde on Monday met with members of the Guinean community in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. And I think AU has been very clear, especially when it comes to the leaders that are, the AU chairperson has already messed with this constitution, so I don't even know what I'm talking about. He will not even care to look at, because there is a provision in the AU about countries who goes against the constitution. There are countries who do not respect leaders who do not respect the constitution. I think there's a provision there that AU can actually come in and even put sanctions on such a leader if he insists on. Because there has been a need for the leaders, especially across Africa, to respect the constitution and the law of the land, which they have failed. But if now the AU chairperson is the one who has gone ahead and mutilated his own country's constitution, what are we left with? Not much, I guess. So there we are. And in South Sudan, a member of the Transitional National Legislative Assembly says some South Sudanese leaders, I will say all, have not been taking their job seriously. Honorable Mary Kiden, who represents Kajo Keji in Yei River State, believes that lack of commitment by leaders of South Sudan has led to the 5-year conflict. And I agree with her entirely. She attributes it to the inexistence of federal system of governance in the country. So I'll just take the key point there, is that the lack of commitment by leaders of South Sudan, and that is the crisis that South Sudanese find themselves today. You have leaders who are just there to serve their own self-interest, just for their own self-gratification. They don't put the country first. And Honorable Mary Kiden said, and that is what has propelled and fueled this conflict in South Sudan for now 5 years. And we're still seeing some signs that even November deadline might be a problem. But of course, the leaders came 2 weeks ago and told us, they will meet the deadline in November. So we're waiting to see that. But if you've been following what has been happening, then we have a lot to worry about and not much to celebrate in South Sudan. So she said, Honorable Mary Kiden, that what is happening in South Sudan and the chaos that we see there is because of the lack of commitment by leaders of South Sudan, and that has led to the 5-year conflict. I absolutely, entirely agree with you, Mary, this afternoon, because if the South Sudanese leaders were very serious and were putting the country first, South Sudan will be, this conflict would have long gone, and now we'll be speaking about something totally different. So now let's talk about Biafra. And as I mentioned earlier, or let me just read through all this and then you tell me your thoughts. Now, the indigenous people of Biafra, that is the IPOB, has vowed to protest against President Muhammadu Buhari and his government during the 74th United Nations General Assembly in the United States this week. According to the pro-Biafran group, the essence of the protest was to stand against the continued onslaught, arrest, and secret abduction of its members by agents allegedly sponsored by the federal government of Nigeria. And the IPOB also said that the protest will serve to prove to the entire world its resoluteness and determination to achieve an independent state of Biafra free from impunity, corruption, poverty, and human rights abuses. Now, this is a letter that was written on behalf by the group's, a PR person, Mr. I think Powerful, somebody powerful. So I'll just read part of the letter that was made official by the leadership of Biafra. And it says, our meeting with United Nations officials last week were frank and forthright. And if there were doubts before in their minds that Nigeria is one almighty calamity, the feeling we got after our discussions is that they now have a proper appreciation and deep understanding of how irredeemably hopeless the case for one Nigeria has become in light of the reign of impunity, poverty, repression, unbridled corruption, and collapse of the legal system. The well-marshaled case for Biafra self-determination by our leader and prophet of our time, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, was all too apparent for them to see and persuasively argued to the understanding that IPOB will not retreat nor relent in the pursuit for free and liberation of Biafran people. So that is just in part what the letter that was given by the Biafra spokesperson of the group, and he was speaking on behalf of Nnamdi Kanu. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the group is vowing Biafrans. Do you know that there's a planned protest in New York during the 74th United Nations General Assembly meeting there, and you're being rallied if you live anywhere in the US or closer to New York. You're being rallied to attend this protest. So they're saying they'll protest because Buhari is in New York, and they're saying Biafrans will organize themselves and will go there and will protest in front of the whole world there. I don't know what your thoughts on this will be. Please let me know. Will you be willing? Will you be attending this protest there in New York? And will this serve to advance further, the plight of Biafrans? And that letter from the Biafran leadership there, saying that after Mazi Nnamdi Kanu spoke with these UN officials last week, he was able to persuade them that and make them understand how irredeemable and hopeless the case of Nigeria is, and has become in light of the reign of there's a lot of impunity. You can see when you arrest somebody without even producing proper, without even proper evidence, and you just put them in court without even trial. That is a government that works against impunity. And then the court orders that you release this person, and you don't. The level of impunity in that, and you're thumbing your nose to the law, but that happens, as mentioned here. The lack of respect of the Constitution by our leaders is just appalling, and the poverty, repression, unbridled corruption, and collapse of the legal system. These are just some of the things that Mr. Nnamdi Kanu said, that it really advises the need for Biafra to be a separate state because of some of these issues that have plagued Nigeria as a country, and the leadership of Nigeria that is, plagued with impunity, corruption, poverty, repression, and all of these bad things. And of course, this Nnamdi Kanu there is saying that the legal system in Nigeria has completely collapsed, and he's saying the situation is very hopeless and irredeemable. Please let me know your thoughts on that. And of course, the of course, the protest that is being organized at the United Nations there in New York by Biafran group. Please let me know your thoughts on that. And let's just look at Ambazonia. Ogebe, there you're saying, South Sudanese leaders are not serious, and I agree with Honorable Mary. And you know what? I agree with her 100% entirely. They're not. They're not serious. And just to learn here about a report that was released the other day by the George Clooney group and Pedagast, and they were saying that a lot of players are really benefiting from the chaos that is happening in South Sudan. I think that could be the reason why. The lack of commitment in finding a lasting peace in South Sudan, because they're benefiting from chaos. Of course, the outside, external people cannot come in South Sudan unless they're working in cahoots with the top government officials or with the government as it is, for them to benefit from this. They must be working together. So it's working for them. They're benefiting. The leadership there in South Sudan. So they would want to continue, aiding this chaos. And that's why you see, when it comes to a time where they really need to find a solution to the war in South Sudan, and to have peace, a lasting peace, and for the country to start rebuilding, you see, all of a sudden, demands are being made. This is not ready. What. So they just excuses, because there's not that serious commitment, about finding a peace in South Sudan. So that's that now they're even that report that was given last week, they're making it have a stronger case against the leadership of South Sudan. According to George Clooney and his group there, he said a lot of, especially international companies from the United States, China, and other countries. And yesterday I was just reading a news here, our former President Moi, who was very instrumental in the peace talks in South Sudan, Kenya that time. And his son now is mentioned to have made a lot of money from the chaos in South Sudan. So you see, a lot of people are benefiting from this. And so that's why they would just hope to continue, South Sudan to continue suffering, to continue with the war, because they get to benefit. And how selfish is that? And to see that the leaders lack the commitment, because they've shown, not even I think, they have shown their lack of commitment in finding a lasting solution to the problems in South Sudan, in finding a lasting solution and bringing all South Sudanese together and start rebuilding the country. They've failed, and they've shown, that is not even in their best, in the top of the agenda. All they want is, okay, fine, I want power. You come here, I'll give you this. It's just power sharing, very, very selfish. That's all that agreement, all that peace deal. Tell me where in that peace deal has mentioned even the root causes of the war in South Sudan. Tell me where that has been addressed. Nobody's even looking at that. How has South Sudanese suffered? These people who have killed this over 400,000 South Sudanese plus and counting, how are they going to be brought into book? Nobody's mentioning that, because that is not their concern. All they care about, and all that peace deal entails, is just power sharing, among other issues that really might not be even at the forefront that might benefit South Sudanese right now. So I'm very disappointed as an African, and I'm very disappointed by the selfishness of our leadership sometimes, and it's just ridiculous. So I fully support what Mary has said, that there's lack of commitment in finding a lasting solution to South Sudan, and that is what has fueled this war and has sustained this war for the last 5 years. I completely agree with her, and I completely agree with you, Mr. Omot there, Ogebe, Ochan. Thank you. We agree with Mary this afternoon. And Non-Soul, you're saying, go and look for any IPOB near you and join like Mazi Namdi. Can always say IPOB will work with our files when the time comes. IPOB One Family. All right. So if you were in New York there, I hear there's supposed to be some protest organized by IPOB against President Buhari, who is attending there. And he went with a few governors and some delegation there from Nigeria. He's attending the 74th, United Nations General Assembly there there in New York. So Biafrans have been, organizing a protest there. I just learned of it this morning. So if you can get the information there and let me know your thoughts on that. Is it a good move, to go and protest there in New York at the United Nations headquarters there? And let's end with Ambazonia, where Ambazonia fighters in Fako Division, southwest region of Cameroon, are due to participate at the major national dialogue convened by President Paul Biya through telephone conferencing. Like, seriously. These just a few fighters of Ambazonia. But the main people that really carry the dreams and aspirations of Ambazonia as a people are somewhere in jail, serving a life sentence. So this very small fraction of fighters, apparently they're going to participate in this peace dialogue through a telephone conference. How effective will this even be? Seriously, Mr. Paul Biya's administration is not very serious, and its commitment towards finding a solution to Ambazonia, of course, is wanting. And I don't know if at all the talks will include secession, because he said before that that is not, it's not something that he's willing to talk about. But there you go, a section of fighters, of Ambazonia fighters. Will be participating in the national dialogue that has been convened by President Paul Biya through a phone call. Could you ask yourself why they could not travel to the other side of Cameroon? That is because perhaps they do not trust the government that they will come back, they'll even come back alive, or they'll even come back at all, So that must have advised the reason for them to want to participate. But will that be effective at the end of the day? Will that be effective? Will that help solve the problems? Because I think over the phone, this is something very important. Why is it that they could not go there? Why couldn't Paul Biya perhaps send some government officials in Ambazonia and try to get these fighters' point of view? Over the phone, I don't think those talks will be effective. And I said here yesterday, there are lots of parties that are and stakeholders in Cameroon there, and that have already written their suggestions, and of course handed it over to the National Dialogue, committee. I guess if at all he's not, I think there should be a committee that will be looking into this in terms of trying to find a lasting solution to the Anglophone crisis there. And of course, Amazonians, the same way Biafrans have been very clear. They do not want anything else. They want to secede. They want their country. They want to go have their own country and live their own lives. So prayers, I see you here, and they're saying those are fake Amazonian. That's what I'm thinking, because this section, or maybe they just want to make it appear as though Ambazonians participated in the dialogue. Are these even true Ambazonians? Because the last time I checked, they were not even willing to speak with the President Paul Biya, and they had their leaders who were speaking on their behalf, and these leaders have been jailed. So these fighters that Paul Biya's government is purporting to want to speak to and have a conversation with through a telephone, what? And how effective will that even be? And how are they going to speak while the people, as I said earlier, who hold all the aspirations and all the dreams and who understands what the Ambazonians really want, are already languishing in jail? How will that even work? And you're saying you're not part of them. Okay, thank you so much. So, I'm afraid that is all we had for you today. And perhaps tomorrow we'll have Dr. Matsanga join us. But for now, I want to thank you so very much for keeping me company and for engaging with me. We've looked at several African countries and what is happening across the continent. We've looked at Zimbabwe, we've looked at Algeria, and just the current development there from Algeria. Brother to former President Abdulaziz Bouteflika, Mr. Said Bouteflika, has been handed a 15-year jail term over money laundering and corruption there. So, as I said earlier, the military, they are trying to give in to every demand by the protesters. They've been protesting and saying everybody that worked with this person has to go to jail, has to be convicted, must face trial, and must leave. So that is what is happening. And also in Nigeria, of course, activist Omoyele Sowore, the High Court ordered for him to be released immediately yesterday, but the government has not allowed that to happen. I don't know if that has happened today. And we've looked at Biafra and the calls for a protest in the United Nations General Assembly during this meeting that is happening there in the UN. The Biafran family have called for a protest there against President Muhammadu Buhari, who is attending, of course, the 74th United Nations General Assembly there in New York, United States. And we looked at Ambazonia, and now a section of the fighters say they will participate in the dialogue that has been called by Paul Biya through a telephone. But one of our viewers here from Ambazonia saying those are fake fighters. And yes, and I thought as well, because the people who really would represent Ambazonians very well are in jail. And the first step will be for the government to release them, if at all Mr. Paul Biya is serious with these peace talks that he's saying he is. And we looked at Rwanda and how it will be hosting the 26th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And you're wondering why Rwanda? Because Rwanda was never colonized by the British, because Commonwealth is for the countries that were colonized by the British. But, Rwanda, I think, applied to be part of that and was admitted 12 years ago. And so it will be hosting that next year. And we looked at Guinea and how President Alpha Conde now wants to mutilate the constitution to allow for him, because his second term is ending next year, and he wants to add another term. So he's preparing the country for a referendum so that he can serve beyond the constitutionally allowed term there in Guinea, and that is a ticking time bomb. And that is the dilemma of the third term that really a lot of us Africans we find ourselves in, when our leaders simply do not want to leave power for somebody else. And we've also looked at South Sudan and how one of the honorable members there, Mary Kiden, has said that the lack of commitment by leaders of South Sudan has led to the 5-year war and 5-year conflict that has plagued the country, and that we totally agree with that. And also we've looked at Egypt and how President Morsi is trying to clamp down on the Muslim Brotherhood members there, and will that be counterproductive for his administration right now? And of course, yesterday he gave this speech about Libya at the UN, General Assembly there, and he said, there shouldn't be interference by external forces. And I'm thinking he is one of the forces, together with some countries out there, that are continuing to fuel the war in Libya. But one of our viewers here said, by him saying external forces, he meant countries who are not Arabs. But I'm thinking France is not Arab. United States, where Khalifa Haftar is a citizen in the United States, they're not Arab. So what is going on? And who is he telling off in this case? And the dilemma that Libya finds itself as, UN-backed government is being fought, and AU chairperson is one of the people that is aiding to fight the UN-backed government. It is ridiculous. And of course, we've looked at what else have we looked at? Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, president of South Africa, yesterday they were celebrating the Heritage Day, and he was saying that all 23,000 public schools in South Africa will start teaching at least an African language. And I'm thinking, will that even liberate their minds from the yokes of apartheid, the things that they suffered so much that has made them not be able to stand other Africans? Will that help them see us differently, other Africans from these other African countries? Will that open their minds once they learn our languages, maybe Swahili, maybe some Igbo, maybe another language from somewhere across Africa? Will that even help, if anything, and help them integrate with other African nationalities? I don't know if this will be a solution for the horrific xenophobic attacks that continues to happen there in South Africa, but that is what President Cyril Ramaphosa was proposing, that all public schools will offer African languages. I don't even know what advised him to. Would they even want to learn, really, the African languages? And of course, we've looked at Zimbabwe and how the police are preventing a union leader from heading to South Africa to receive medical treatment as he recovers from alleged abduction. This comes hours after the High Court ordered the police to allow Mr. Peter Magumbe to leave the country. Remember, Dr. Peter Magumbe, who had been allegedly abducted, and he was found when he was found after 5 days, he was extremely disoriented, so something might have really happened to him, but police have refused that he cannot go to South Africa to seek for help, but the court had ordered. You see, another person there. We've seen in Nigeria, the court ordered for say that activist to be removed, to be released with immediate effect with no conditions. The government has refused to respect that ruling, and now here the court has ordered that the police should release this Dr. Peter to go seek for treatment. The state has refused to do that. So if the government itself is the one that is not respecting the constitution that it swore to protect, because that is part of the oath that they take there, right? The presidents and even these people, the police, everybody, when they're going to public service, you swear to protect the constitution. So this constitution that you are a custodian to, you refuse to honor it. What does that mean to the rest of us, to the rest of the citizens? So that are just, of course, some of the stories. And of course, Ghana, apparently there was an attempted coup, but water has been poured. And the claims by the Ghanaian government that there was an attempted coup, people are not taking that very seriously, and doubts have been cast. And of course, we've looked at the daily nations here, the daily newspapers here, and the top three: the Daily Nation, the Star, and the Standard newspaper, and the latest. And of course, what made headlines this morning is the burial of the Dutch tycoon. Yesterday, he was buried according to Jews' burial rituals there in the Jews cemetery here in Nairobi. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and thank you so much for your company. Hopefully, we can meet here tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Africa. But for now, it is bye-bye.